Hi, this is Jaya. In this video, we shall see a brief introduction to Australian history. The ancient history of Australia shows to us the rich and varied cultures of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people. The oldest known human remains in the world are these Aboriginals. There are over 100,000 recorded sites of ancient rock art in Australia, which tells about the ancientness of this place. Before the arrival of the British colonizers in 1788, Australia was inhabited by the indigenous people, that is, the Aboriginals and Torres Strait Islanders. Sometimes these people are referred to as the first Australians, and there were over 500 different clan groups or nations around the continent, many with distinctive cultures, beliefs, and languages. New South Wales was settled as a penal colony, as a place where Britain could send convicted criminals because her prisons were overcrowded. The first wave of migrants to Australia included men of capital who were attracted by the colony's agricultural prospects and the availability of convict labour. Their enthusiasm, together with the gold rush's era of the mid 19th century, pushed out the boundaries of the new settlement, and by the end of the 1850s, there were six separate Australian colonies. Settlers living in Australia in the 19th century lived at the frontier of not only a new land but of a new society. The diverse backgrounds, together with the culture of indigenous Australians who have lived on the Australian continent for more than 50,000 years, have helped create a uniquely Australian identity and spirit. When Captain James Cook named Ero Country Botany Bay in 1770, he was claiming the British rights to ownership of the east coast of Australia through the European concept of terra nullius. Terra nullius meant that under European law, the land was unoccupied by humans, so the British didn't have to negotiate with leaders or make a treaty. Cook and the British, who came afterwards, were effectively claiming to be the first settlers on the land in the Sydney area. When the first fleet arrived in January 1788, they were under orders to minimize harm to Aboriginal peoples. However, as they began to clear the bush, fish, and hunt animals, conflict began. At the same time, the first colonizers introduced a wave of epidemics, including chickenpox, smallpox, typhoid, measles, and influenza, to which Aboriginal peoples had no herd immunity. The diseases then spread into other Aboriginal nations ahead of colonizers. It is impossible to accurately determine the scale of deaths from disease. Estimates typically range from 50 to 70% of Aboriginal populations in southeastern Australia. The epidemics had a devastating effect on the elders of Aboriginal communities. The death of the elders over a short period of time meant the loss of much of the clan's knowledge systems that had developed, evolved, and adapted for thousands of years. In some cases, their knowledge of vegetation, fauna, climate, and landforms were lost in under 2 years. The colonizers found it easy to clear Eora land, now called the Sydney Basin. They wanted to extend their farmlands east beyond the Blue Mountains and Darug country, but the mountains were difficult for them to cross with the equipment they needed to establish farms. Conflict ensued and frontier wars were fought by the Darug people in defense of their land. Survivors of the epidemics were faced with food shortages as their traditional economics were disrupted. Native crops were wiped out and many species were unable to survive due to the disruption of the ecosystem. Fish stocks were depleted by the large population of British. Animals that were traditionally hunted for food often couldn't survive on the farmlands as their food and water resources were depleted and destroyed. The introduction and spread of European livestock had a particular devastating impact on the existing ecosystems and environment, compressing soil and ruining Aboriginal croplands. The Eora peoples were faced with starvation and were eventually forced to rely on food rations from Europeans. Historical texts from Europeans show that Aboriginal survivors often lived on the edge of European settlements. Later, the practice of forcibly moving survivors to missions and reserves further meant remaining knowledge about traditional lands and separate distinct languages were lost. The frontier wars were a period of violent conflict between Aboriginals and Torres Strait Islanders people who were actively defending their way of life and Europeans who wanted to use indigenous land to recreate a European system of farming settlements. Europeans came to Australia with the idea of creating farmland out of what they perceived as empty, unoccupied land. The existence of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people disrupted this aim. The frontier wars occurred at different times in different parts of Australia. For example, the Torres Strait Islanders peoples faced dispossession and fought for their land in the late 1800s. Indigenous resistance to having their food and other resources depleted and being forcibly moved off their land led to an acceptance among many Europeans that killing Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people was a solution. This was despite the killing of any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people by a European officially being a capital offence. Consequently, the poisoning of food and water supplies was widespread on the frontiers. According to historian Henry Reynolds in his 1998 book, This Whispering in Our Hearts, those Europeans in frontier settlements who questioned the killings of whole groups of men, women, and children were often regarded as contentious outcasts and were boycotted, bullied, or banished. While the actual figure is impossible to know for sure, some historians have estimated that hundreds of thousands of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people were massacred by European colonizers between 1788 and 1928. In comparison, it's estimated that several hundred European people were killed in conflicts during this time. There was widespread public discussion amongst Europeans about the morality of colonization, the violence, and killing. The government in London became alarmed at reports that reached them. One significant event in 1838 was the Myall Creek massacre in northern New South Wales. In retaliation for the killing of stockmen, dozens of Werre people were killed one by one. The matter was reported to the authorities by locals, and unusually, the perpetrators were committed for trial in the Supreme Court of New South Wales. At the end of 1938, 7 Europeans were hanged for the crime. Not long after, the authorities in London insisted that the New South Wales colony introduce a system of protection. Each colony was required to put in place systems to ensure the welfare and survival of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders peoples. In practice, however, this meant that they were further dispossessed from ancestral lands by being moved to missions and reserves. Indigenous languages and cultural practices were removed. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, including children, were legally allowed to become a form of slave labor for Europeans and treated differently with different rules and laws. As a result, the protection system is also regarded as a negative and damaging event in Australian history. There is ongoing investigation into the history of the frontier wars, including efforts to map the occurrence across Australia. Recent research has shown that massacres occurred as recently as 1930. Between 1910 to 1970, many Indigenous children were forcibly removed from their families as a result of various government policies. The generations of children removed under these policies became known as the stolen generation. The policies of children removal left a legacy of trauma and loss that continues to affect the Indigenous communities, families, and individuals. The forcible removal of Indigenous children from their families was part of the policy of assimilation. Assimilation was based on the assumption of black inferiority with white superiority, which proposed that Indigenous people should be allowed to die out through a process of natural elimination or, where possible, should be assimilated into the white community. Children taken from these parents as part of the stolen generation were taught to reject the Indigenous heritage and forced to adapt white culture. Their names were often changed and they were forbidden to speak their traditional languages. Some children were adopted by white families and many were placed in institutions where abuse and neglect were common. Kevin Rudd's National Apology speech to the stolen generations is a landmark moment in history. When Kevin Rudd came to power in 2007, he promised to deliver a national apology to the stolen generation. This promise was fulfilled on the 13th February 2008. The dream time is a commonly used term for describing important features of Aboriginal spiritual beliefs and existence. Aboriginals believe that the dream time was at the very beginning. The land and the people were created by the spirits. They made the rivers, streams, waterholes, the land, hills, rocks, plants, and animals. It is believed that the spirits gave them their hunting tools and each tribe its land, their totems with their dreaming. The Aboriginals believed that the entire world was made by the ancestors way back in the very beginning of time, the dream time. The ancestors made everything. The ancestors made particular sites to show the Aboriginal people which places were to be sacred. The Aboriginals performed ritual ceremonies and customary songs near the sacred sites to please ancestral spirits and to keep themselves alive. Distinct tribes had different philosophies and beliefs about the ancestors who made the world. Some believed that the ancestors were animal spirits. Dreamtime is the foundation of Aboriginal religion and culture. It dates back some 65,000 years. It is a story of events that have happened, how the universe came to be, how human beings were created, and how the Creator intended for humans to function within the world as they knew it. Aboriginal people understood the dream time as a beginning that never ended. They held the belief that the dream time is a period on a continuum of past, present, and future. The Aboriginals learnt about their beginnings through their Dreamtime creation folklores that told of the momentous actions of the creators. The myths were the foundation of Aboriginal society and provided certainty about existence. The Australian Aboriginals believed that the lands they occupied was once not in existence like it is today. It was free from form or life, vacuous, empty. They unquestioningly believed that this was the way things once were because the ancestors had said so and they would never doubt their word. It was during what has become known as the dream time the land, mountains, hills, rivers, plants, life forms, both animal and human, and sky above were formed by the actions of mysterious and supernatural spirits. During the dream time, the creators made men, women, and animals, declared the laws of the land and how people were to behave to one another, the customs of food supply and distribution, the rituals of initiation, the ceremonies of death, which are required to be performed so that the spirit of the dead travel peacefully to his or her spirit place, and the laws of marriage. It is believed that many of the creators continue to live on the land or in the sky above, watching over them. These supernatural enigmatic creators were often referred to as men and women who had the ability to change shape into animals and other creatures such as the rainbow serpent. They are also stories of heroes and heroines and father and mother figures. A song line, also called dreaming track, is one of the paths across the land or sometimes the sky within the animist belief system of Aboriginal Australians, which mark the route followed by localized creators beings during the dreaming. The parts of the song lines are recorded in traditional song cycles, stories, dance, and art, and are often the basis of ceremonies. They are a vital part of Aboriginal culture, connecting people to their land. And this is the brief introduction of Australia. If you have anything more to add on to what I've said, please write it in the comment box, like the video, share it with your friends, and if you have not subscribed my channel, please subscribe and support. Thank you.